I'm just going to jump straight into this with kind of a PSA of sorts, because if you haven't seen GP Lamas' video on how to remove bike pedals from way back in the day, this is just a refresher. I don't need to memorize which pedal is reverse threaded. I just remember to stand on the pedal and pull up on the tool. Whether that's a hex key or a pedal wrench, doesn't matter. Same on both sides. It's like magic. It's really obvious when you think about it, but I don't know how many times I jammed my hand into the chainring before 2016, so thank you, Lama. Now, this is not the type of tips that I was going to cover in this video, but if you ever remove the crank with the pedals on and then realize you had to remove them, it is kind of a pain to do so. So before I even get the bike on the stand for the real topic of this video, the pedals come off. Now, disassembling a bike, how hard can it be, right? And spoiler alert, it's not that difficult at all, so I don't think you need to hear me explain how to loosen a bolt, to remove a seat post, how to remove a chain, or even a derailleur for that matter. But I got a question a few weeks ago asking me if I had any tips regarding disassembly when it comes to hydraulic disc brakes. Specifically how to avoid making a mess, spilling brake fluid all over the floor, and not to mention in the frame as you remove the brake lines. I also managed to eat some asphalt around the same time, making a nice old mess of my shifters. Luckily the frame itself avoided any damage apart from a scratched up rear through axle. So that was one positive thing I could cling on to as I stood crying in the shower, scrubbing my road rash. Anyway, after the crash, I wanted to strip the bike down, really make sure everything was okay, and maybe do a little refurbish project on the shifters, but that's a future project. I also had planned to move everything over to the Equilibrium anyways, so I thought this was a good opportunity to share some general tips and a few hacks to keep your bike and bike room from becoming a mess when disassembling hydraulic disc brakes. So step 1 is to drain the brake fluid from the system. And I have two ways of doing this, by gravity and by syringe. And I will do both methods in this video. First, I start by removing the brake pads and installing the bleed blocks that you should have gotten with your brakes or your bike. While I'm not expecting to make a mess, it's always better to play it safe and protect those pads from any kind of contamination. Starting with the gravity method, I have a regular PET bottle with a rubber hose that will fit the bleed nipple on my caliper. That hose is going through a hole in the bottle cap. My hose, as in that rubber hose I mean, came from a proper bleed kit, but I'm pretty sure you can get this much cheaper at your local hardware store. Although having a bleed kit will come in handy anyway if you ever plan on installing those brakes again. I also made a few small holes in the bottle cap as I want the air to freely flow out of that bottle as I drain. So here I secured the bottle to my bike stand with an improvised hook and a rubber band, then attached the hose to the caliper bleed nipple. I opened the bleed screw on top of the brake lever, and as I open the bleed port on the caliper, I can just sit back and watch as Mother Earth does its thing. Once the flow has stopped, I give it a little help by squeezing the brake lever a few times. In the past, it was at this point I would start undoing the hose bolts, and there would always be a few drops left that would start dripping all over the handlebars or down on the floor. It's not a total disaster when working with mineral oils, but not so great if you're messing around with SRAM DOT brake fluid. But there's a better way. So first I close the bleed screw on the shift lever, then unscrew the shift lever body completely from the bar clamp. And with the help of a totally different type of clamp, I secure the hose on the top of the bars, pointing upwards. Then I use my hose cutting tool and cut the hose. I leave about a centimeter or two of hose sticking out of the lever body, and here's my first little hack of the day. Instead of removing the hose bolt and hose completely from the lever, I used a Presta valve cap to plug the hose. So I hope you kept all those valve caps around. You never know when they will come in handy. Having a piece of hose left sticking out also makes it easier to put the lever vertical in a bottle and leave it to drain overnight if I'm really OCD about it. Oh yeah, don't forget that lever clamp that's still on the bars that needs to go back into the lever for safekeeping. And speaking of OCD, I'm going a bit overkill here, but sometimes you just need to let yourself go crazy. There's still a tiny amount of fluid left in those hoses and caliper, so to help with this I cut a small section of a normal drinking straw that will fit over the hose. Then I use this little air duster that I usually have for my camera gear to blow a little air and push a few extra drops of fluid out of the caliper. Now, if you have an air compressor, you would have some real power to put through, but it's not something I have access to. Anyway, this little rubber blob of joy works just fine. You might be tempted to just blow with your mouth into the straw, but I highly would advise against that, since besides air, it would also introduce water vapor or humidity. What do you even call the water content in your breath? Anyway, you don't want that getting down into the caliper. After that's done, I will secure the open end of the hose with another valve cap for the time being, close the bleed port on the caliper and disconnect my drain bottle. Then it's time to tackle the rear brake, which I will do with a syringe. This method is a bit quicker, especially on the rear since the brake line is longer, and depending on your bike stand, it could be difficult to make sure that the brake fluid doesn't have to flow upwards, especially through the chainstay, like you can see here. The order of thing is pretty much the same though. Remove the brake pads and install the bleed blocks, but instead of the drain bottle, I attach my syringe. This particular one is from my Park Tool bleed kit, but syringes are included in most bleed kits these days. Then I open up the bleed screw on the top of the brake lever and then the caliper and slowly start sucking out the fluid. And once it's mostly air coming out, I close the caliper off and drain the syringe in my drain bottle, reconnect it again to give it a few more sucks and a few squeezes on the brake lever. This time I also tried to put the drain bottle on and tilted the frame while squeezing the lever, but it seemed like the syringe had done a pretty damn good job of cleaning that hose out. The air blower trick didn't do much either, so I closed up the brake lever and caliper, and just the same way as I did on the front brake, I unscrewed the lever from the bar clamp, cut the hose and put another valve cap on the brake lever end for storage. So now there's the conundrum of removing the brake lines from the frame. So first thing I want to do is to plug the open hose end. And I know I have the valve caps, but those would easily pop off if I started pulling the hoses through the frame or handlebars. So I use another related part, namely an old valve core. And I'm sure you also keep your old valve cores around like any sane person. You never know when they'll come in handy. I think I'm repeating myself. I use some wire cutters to cut off the bottom part of the core so I can pull out the pin. And this is the perfect diameter for plugging a hose, at least when it comes to Shimano hoses. As I'm watching this clip right now, I realize cutting the top part and using the bottom rubber part as the stopper might even be more leak-proof. But anyway, this works. I wouldn't use this method to plug a hose on the International Space Station or anything, but it's good enough for getting the hoses out from an internally routed handlebar and frame without getting stuck inside. As you might have realized, I will pull the hoses from the bottom. That's why I haven't removed the calipers yet. It's much easier to pull the hoses out when you have something to pull on. Even though the hose ends are plugged, removing them in this direction will minimize the chance of brake fluid ending up in your frame, since the hose end is for the most part pointing upwards. Here for the rear, I totally forgot about the foam tube I have around the brake hose, so I had to backtrack once to get that out, but eventually I got everything out, and from what I can see, no leakage whatsoever. So I'll leave you with one last tip that could maybe save $1 or $2, and that is to reuse the brake hoses. In my case, the front hose is too short now after cutting it, but the rear brake hose still has plenty of length, so that one I can definitely use on the front again. The hose is now long enough that I can trim off any annoying kinks like I have here and still have way more hose than I need for the front. And you don't need to remove the caliper. The only thing you need to do is to move over the adapter plate from the front caliper to the rear. The adapter plate is the only difference between the calipers when you buy them new, as in like the front and rear, whatever. The caliper itself is identical. And having the caliper already installed means I only need a new barb and olive for the brake lever side. So yeah, good times. And that's pretty much what I had for today. I thought this would be a short 5-minute video. It feels like I've been talking for like 5 hours. Kudos if you stayed until the end, and feel free to share any other tips on bike disassembly down in the comments. I'm always eager to learn. Have a good day, drink water, and peace.